Hello, Trevecca. My name is Rickard, and the majority of you do not know me. And the reason for it is I'm professor of accounting and strategy in the Skinner School of Business Technology, but my teaching load is in the MBA, the MPA, the DBA. It's across the spectrum. I've been asked today to share with you because I believe that God has placed something on my heart to give you an idea of just how significant it is that God delights in you and delights in me and wants to use us for His purpose. But to make this transparent, ideally, I wish this was a small group and I could tell my story and you could tell your story about the stupidest thing that you've done in college. That's not going to happen today, but at least I can tell you mine. It involves, believe it or not, a tennis ball. My roommate and I, at least for a couple years when I was in college, we would go out a few times during the week, have a competitive game of tennis. I'm a very competitive person, and it's just very important for me to have that release while I was a student. So one day we're out and I'm dominating, okay, until one moment where I reach back with my forehand, and I hit it, and it was boom, a blast. It scaled over the tennis court fence, over the fence that was on the outside, and with that adrenaline rush, I immediately bolted, went outside the tennis court area, and I dashed straight to that fence, the outer fence. And I thought, this is nothing. I looked, it's 10 feet tall. I started scaling the fence, and when I got to the very top, I realized that there was an additional obstacle. There was a stretch of barbed wire across the top of the fence about this far above the pipe. I think, I can do this. I pulled myself up, placed my feet strategically on that pole, and I'm thinking, I got this. And so I got ready to make the leap, and when I did, and you can imagine where this is gonna go, my shoestring gets caught in the barbed wire, and I'm gonna brace myself, so I reach over my left hand and then with my right arm, and I won't go into details other than this. Yes, I had the cuts, but the worst thing about it is I'm dangling upside down on the fence until the shoestring breaks and I tumble down to the ground. But that's not the worst of it. Our college football team was practicing just to the left. So this is not only the stupidest thing I've done, this is also the most embarrassing thing because now I've got to work my way over to the athletic trainers and in full view of the football team, I guess I'm about to be placed on injured reserve. The reality is I end up in the emergency room. It wasn't that bad, get stitched up a little bit. It's probably one of the reasons why I end up marrying an emergency room nurse because I'm very accident prone. So why would I tell you that type of story as a way of being transparent with you? Well, I think it touches the reality, the fact that we are flawed human beings. We have our weaknesses, but God truly delights in us no matter what would be our tendencies in life. I heard a Christian comedian, I think it was Ken Davis one time, make this statement about God and how He views some of us. It's like God sees us with our flaws, with a tragedy that we experience, and He calls over the angels and says, look at this silly human, and look what he's done this time. Now that's probably not theologically correct, but sometimes when I look at my life, I'm like, well, you know, that might connect in regards to the way God looks at least some of our experiences. But if I can get serious with you, at one point or another in our lives, we struggle. We struggle with, at least to a certain extent or another, with our identity, our purpose. And it's so important for us to come to grips with the fact that God delights in who we are. Yeah, the Bible teaches that God's love is what saves us. It's His grace. He pursues us. This is about God. But there comes a point when we actually need to at least accept the fact that He's designed us a certain way. And the more that we can commit to taking that design and accepting who we are. I mean, if I take a look at my life, I'm short, I don't have a sexy voice, and I've already shown you that I'm accident prone, but it really doesn't matter. The more I accept the fullness of who God has created me to be, the more likely that I'm going to have a fulfilled life. And so are you. So that's really my challenge for you today. The sooner that we come to grips with that. You know, I got saved, but then I needed to come to a realization that I needed God to just take over completely as it relates to my life. And I'm going to use this analogy. When I go back and I think about trying to scale that fence. If I approach life the same way, where I'm trying to take a shortcut, or I'm trying to do it on my own, my life is going to come to a cripple in much the same way as what I experienced in that day. One of the things that I failed to realize at that moment when I'm about to scale the fence, if I would have realized that there was a better way, there was actually about 60 feet to my left, a gate that went through the fence. I could have easily just gone through the gate, retrieved the tennis ball, and gone back and hopefully continued on with my match and continue to dominate. But instead, you already have the story as far as how that day ended. So let me give you a brief overview as far as how this has played out in my life, as far as understanding that God saved me, but He also delights in me, and I need to accept the fact that He delights in how He created me. I mean, the Bible talks about we're fearfully and wonderfully made. It uses references multiple times as far as how God sees us as His special creation. So let me give you an idea of what were some important events for me in regards to just taking my life and accepting what is His design and taking it to the next level. The first of the experiences was shortly after I graduated from high school. I was at a church youth camp, and lots of great things happened during that week, but it reached the point where God was communicating to me and clearly saying, I don't have it all. I don't have all of you, and I need all of you. And so I went to an altar and I bowed, and it wasn't just going there and bowing my head and getting on my knees. It was a surrender of the heart. It was a realization that my heart and your heart has a throne. And we can put people, we can put different things on that throne. But the reality is, it was a throne put there by God for Him to occupy that space. And so here's what I did at that moment. I said, God, my career, whatever it's going to be, it's yours. My future spouse, whoever it is, that's going to be yours. My role in the church, my friendships, I'm committed to you. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that I didn't struggle with that as my life went further. There were times when I would try to get back on that throne, and I would try to put something else on the throne. But for the most part, that's what I committed to on that day. And God has been faithful in His grace to allow me to live that out. Shortly thereafter, and here's the second of what I consider to be big events. I was in my local church. And for that specific meeting, this beautiful woman was asked to give her testimony and be the primary speaker. And I listened to what she had to say, and it was a challenge. She was at that time in her 30s, and she was a newlywed. And she was talking about when she was approximately my age and the age of the other teenagers who were in the audience, that she made a commitment to God. She said, overall, I wanted God's man for me, and I was going to commit to sexual purity, and I was going to just take my dating life and turn it over completely to Him and just trust that He would bring that right person. Well, what she also went on to say is that it wasn't until she was in her 30s that God brought that special man, and then she pointed in the audience to this very handsome guy that she had married. And that resonated with me, and I thought, if she can make that commitment, I can make that commitment. But realistically, as I was looking at it, I'm thinking, well, my commitment will be relatively short term. I still need to go to college. A few years after college, God will bring that right person into my life, and I'll live happily ever after. Well, as you'll discover here in a few minutes, that's not exactly how it played out, but that's what I committed to. Now let me go into the third event. Despite experiencing a rewarding business career, God started moving in my life because I was involved in church youth ministry as a volunteer, and there were several other ways that I was engaging in the church, and God just really started emphasizing the fact that I wasn't using my personality and my passions to the fullest extent of what He had for me. And so I left that business career and I took on a youth ministry position. I also embarked upon the pursuit of my MBA because I also believed that God was preparing me for something even bigger in my life. And so to cut to the chase, I had a very wonderful experience building relationships with teenagers, a youth pastor, but then God used that as a springboard in order for me to go into Christian higher education. And over the last 25 years, that's what I've been doing. And so if I put it all together, I can just give you an idea that with accepting God's design and His purpose, that's where real fulfillment comes in. And let me give you an idea of just some of the benefits that I've experienced as a result. I've been married for 25 years. I got married when I was 33 years old, so I think you can see why God used that testimony that day in order for me to have a sense of patience and perseverance until He brought the right person along. I married a beautiful woman, and we got married, like I said, at 33 years old, and I can say this, after 25 years, it only gets better, folks, okay, if you trust in God's way. Also, I have two handsome and courageous sons, but here's probably the most meaningful aspect of being a dad. By making that choice to redirect my life away from, again, a rewarding business career, but something that God wanted to optimize, He opened up an enormous opportunity for me to invest in the lives of my boys through going to the playground, spending time when they were young, coaching them, being there for them during their teen years, and overall, I consider my boys to be two of my best friends. If I also go a step further, as far as the overall benefit, when I think back to the number of teenagers from my youth ministry where I built enormous relationships with, but then the college students of all ages since that time, overall, I can't express enough how when you put your life into God's hands and you let Him work through His purpose and what He wants to do with His design and His overall plan, it's not always going to be smooth, but you'll wake up each day with a sense of fulfillment. Okay, earlier in this message, I talked about that despite our human flaws and weaknesses, God delights in us, and it's so important for us to not only take ownership of that, but delight in ourselves. One of the greatest comforts that I found on my journey is this scripture that God laid out in Psalm 37. Listen to it carefully. If the Lord delights in a man's way, He makes his steps firm. Though he stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with His hand. My way must be based upon investing my life daily in God's kingdom. And right here at Trevecca, that basically extends to the fact that I am recognizing that I am laying my life down sacrificially on a daily basis. It's an investment. And overall, it's a recognition that God has stamped me and you with His image. And the two primary attributes that I see in God living out through my life is the fact that He's a creative God and He's a redemptive God. As a creator, when I look at the type of work that I do, I've been asked to actually create a program. I've been also required to develop courses, and I also go in and I teach. And in all those different ways, what's so essential is that each time that I engage in those type of activities, I need to recognize that it's God and His innovative ways that are living throughout me. But then there's that other attribute. It's that part of God, which I think is His specialty, and that's redemption. And so with His redemptive ways, it's my recognition that He wants to live that out through me as well. And He wants to do the same with you. So what does that consist of? Well, it's the hug, it's the smile, it's the affirmation, it's the quick response in an email. It's recognizing that not only does God want to redeem souls, but with adult learners oftentimes, it's redeeming a career. With those who are at the traditional college age, it's realizing that there's a redemption that's needed from a bad family background or breakups or other types of relationships that did not go well. So I really conclude in this way. I have a $100 bill, and this $100 bill is representative of those type of what I classify as big investments that we make. Like for me, it's teaching that course, it's developing that curriculum. And yeah, I do need to invest my life so that I'm making these types of investments. But what also is so critical, and what I've come to realize is just as important, if not more important, I'm going to represent that by a quarter. And the quarter would be those much smaller types of investments, at least from our perspective. It goes back to what I mentioned before. It's the smile. It's the affirmation. It's seeing someone that's hurting and taking time out of the day to connect. Because overall, if you look at what Jesus taught, He taught that we need to see the hurts in the eyes of others, and we need to see those type of needs, and we need to respond. So I'm gonna encourage you that as you look at how you're gonna invest your life, yeah, you're gonna be doing some of this. You're gonna decide, well, I wanna be a doctor, I'm gonna be a business person, I'm gonna be a teacher, I'm gonna be a pharmacist. And those are, yeah, those investments in creativity and in the way that God wants you to live out your career. But don't leave out this. And that would be all those, what we classify as small things. Service in the church, as far as teaching the Sunday school class, helping out with youth ministry, helping out with children's church, working in the nursery, but also looking in your neighborhood to where there's a need and where you can fulfill it, where it may not be as large scale, but in these incremental ways, that's how we truly, profoundly make a difference for the kingdom, and we represent Jesus Christ. And I'm going to close with this note. Overall, one of the things that I really appreciate about walking with God is I go to bed each night not only feeling at peace with how I've lived that day, but I'm excited to wake up the next day and realize that God has a new adventure for me. And the Christian life is so full of great adventures if we just commit to the fact that it's not about us, but it's all about glorifying Him.